Thank you so much, Congressman Zeldin, for joining us for our climate change discussion. We're going to get right to the first question here. The first question is that your district's proximity to the ocean is both an economic driver to the local economy and also a big reason why lots of folks live here. However, that proximity is also a vulnerability to us, and I can say us since I live in the district, to the impacts of sea level rise and also the greater frequency of storms and the greater intensification of storms. There are many proposals in Congress to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Can you please identify specifically proposals that you're going to support to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And also, what do you think the role is of the federal government in helping us fight climate change?
I think it's really important for the government to be working with the private sector, to have a strong, robust partnership to be able to make progress on this front. The Carbon Capture Improvement Act is a piece of legislation I co-sponsor, a bipartisan bill that would have financial services, financial incentives for industrial facilities, power plants seeking to invest in carbon capture and storage equipment. I also think it's important when you look at high-risk, high-reward pursuits of technology that where a company might not have the ability to invest in research, that the federal government comes in and plays a very important role in that process. Here in the 1st Congressional District, we have Brookhaven National Lab, we have Stony Brook University, we have the ARPA-E projects that the research that gets pursued for the most part at Brookhaven National Lab, to a lesser extent at Stony Brook University, because the progress that we can find in the years and the decades that are ahead might be too much of a high-risk, high-reward endeavor for a particular company. So you can't just assume that that company is going to pursue this research by themselves. The federal government needs to be involved. This is a district almost completely surrounded by water, the 1st Congressional District, and every Long Islander, especially those in the East End, everyone is pro-conservation, pro-environment. We want access to clean air, clean water, and whether it's tripling funding for the Long Island Sound program or the Peconic Estuary, fully funding the National Estuary Program and Sea Grant. As you go around the 1st Congressional District, you see so many opportunities for investment to protect us. You mentioned in your question rising sea levels. Right now, we are finally with a signed chief's report on the Fire Island to Montauk Point plan, which was passed as part of the WRDA bill at the end of July. This 83 miles of coastline between Fire Island and Montauk Point will have a over $1 billion investment in coastal resiliency and to recover from Superstorm Sandy, not just to where we were, but stronger than ever before. These projects WRDA included Hashimomic Cove and Southold, as well as studies of Real Point Preserve in Shelter Island, and Goldsmiths Inlet in Southold, Wading River Creek in Riverhead. All of these projects are important for many different reasons, including what really makes the framework of a great question, so thank you.
Very good, thank you. My name is Melissa Perrott. I'm the Executive Director of Students for Climate Action, and thank you for joining us. Second question. New York has ambitious goals to power 6 million homes with 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. The federal government plays a key role in advancing offshore wind projects. The Federal Bureau of Energy Management was supposed to release a map depicting new wind area by 2019. This map has still not been released. As a congressional member, how will you help advance the development of offshore wind?
Over the course of my time in office, I have frequently met with the companies that are involved in offshore wind, as well as others who are concerned about these projects from different perspectives. Some are the greatest champions of making sure that these offshore wind projects become a reality. Others have concerns, they have voices, and they want to make sure that those voices are heard and their concerns are addressed. It could be concern from the fishermen, or maybe you live where the energy might be getting landed onto Long Island. It's important for everyone to have a voice and a seat at the table. For the for the process to be completed at this particular stage, you now are at the point where you're talking about, okay, if we're landing it at Smith Point Park, here's the map of where it's going to go, potentially up William Floyd, and this is the left-hand turn, this is the right-hand turn. And for the local elected officials, whether you're a member of Congress or you're a county legislator or a town councilman, it's extremely important for residents to feel like they have a voice. They also need education on how this is going to benefit them. We have some of the highest and most inefficient sources of energy here on Long Island right now. And as we look to pursue new opportunities, earlier on I mentioned the ARPA-E research that gets done primarily at Brookhaven National Lab, where you're doing the clean and green research and looking for alternative forms of energy, and wind is an opportunity for us. But for the average Long Islander, they may not be as aware as you are on how this can positively impact their lives. One of the most important ways that they want to know how it's going to impact their lives is going to be with their bill. They want to see cost savings each month. So I have found myself, my role as the member of Congress is communicating with the companies that are pursuing the projects, communicating with BOEM, communicating with anyone who comes to my office and they say, I have a voice, I'm not being heard, I need you to hear me, and sitting down with them and then putting people together. So what I have found is that miscommunication has been, over the course of years, the biggest source of friction. It's just that two parties aren't speaking to each other. And NIMBYism is a big thing here on Long Island, where you have people who are all in favor of having a particular line getting landed at the next town over, but they don't want it landed at their particular town. And decisions have to get made. And it's important when making the decisions that you have all of the facts. That's been my goal throughout this whole process is pursuing facts. I would encourage BOEM through this entire process, pursue facts, and to have an open dialogue, not just with the people who strongly support your initiative, but my message to the offshore wind companies is to also have a robust conversation with people who need an education on how this is going to impact their community and how it's going to impact their lives.
So the third question is the solar investment tax credit. Has really been a big success story in America in promoting the development of solar. Since it was enacted in 2006, solar power has grown 10,000%, creating literally thousands of high-paying jobs and also keeping energy dollars here at home in America. Unfortunately, though, that solar tax credit is set to expire next year in 2021. And that could create a devastating blow to the advancement of solar power across our country and Long Island. So the question is, Congressman, what will you do to ensure that that tax credit stays? And also, what else do you think you can do to help advance the implementation of solar power on Long Island and in our country?
We had these two different tax credits, a PTC and an ITC. One is a production tax credit, the other is an investment tax credit. Both were extended as part of the PATH Act, which President Obama signed into law, and that was during my first term in Congress. I co-sponsor legislation to extend the ITC for another 5 years. This is something that has a strong bipartisan support. We can use more support in the House and the Senate. This is something that I believe is more likely as constituents and advocacy groups speak to their members of Congress, speak to their senators to educate on these tax credits and the positive effects for our environment, for our economy, for this investment to be made. Educating on what the return is on the investment. So similarly to how I supported the extension of the ITC and the PTC in the past, that's why I'm co-sponsoring this legislation that exists right now in the House. And I would encourage my colleagues, whether it gets done before the end of this year or this is an item on the agenda in the House and the Senate in 2021, it's something that benefits Long Islanders, it would benefit the Long Island economy, and it would benefit our environment.
Thank you.
Great. So New York has the most aggressive plan to cut greenhouse gases in the country, but we need federal leadership to move this forward. Hydrofracking, expanding offshore drilling in the Arctic, and reversing regulations on coal moves the nation backwards. How will you fight back against fossil fuels?
Earlier on, I was speaking a little bit about the Carbon Capture Improvement Act, this legislation that I co-sponsored in the last Congress. It now exists with bipartisan support in this Congress as well. And there are these power plants and industrial facilities that exist. They are emitting carbon, and they can use that incentive to make that investment. Maybe they are ready to implement carbon capture and storage equipment at their site, but they need that incentive, and the consequence for their business model, for that community where that business is, and really for our country all benefit. I believe that's really important that we pursue more common ground because you have conservatives, moderates, and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, and I oftentimes find people talking past each other and not to each other on this issue. I'm a member of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. Their model is that when they add a new Republican, they'll add a new Democrat. When they're adding a new Democrat, they're adding a new Republican with it. And that parity, I think, is very helpful. The conversation is important. When I recall last Congress, there was an amendment on an appropriations bill, the Perry Amendment, that came up for a vote, and the Bipartisan Climate Solution Caucus members banded together, and we were able to form enough of a block to prevent this amendment from being passed. It was an amendment that would have had negative effects on studying climate change in the federal government. And it was not passed, not because a one party banded together and got it done alone, but it was because members of both parties banded together to get the job done. You mentioned offshore drilling. I remember when it was first put on the table, the possibility that they would pursue offshore drilling near Long Island or on the Atlantic. And they were meeting in state capitals. They were having hearings all throughout the eastern seaboard. And Albany is not on the coast, but we are. It's going to impact us much more so than the people who live up in Albany. So I picked up the phone. I contacted the Secretary of the Interior at that time, and I said, this isn't going to work. And fortunately, they made a very rare exception of holding a hearing in the 1st Congressional District to receive testimony from the local community. And it was a product of elected officials, community leaders, advocacy groups, concerned residents, all working together. And we certainly made our voice heard. And the reality is, when you look at the 1st Congressional District and the areas off our coast, we don't really have the resources that they are looking for as it relates to offshore drilling. It's not like some of these other areas they're targeting, so they'll cause a lot of environmental damage just unsuccessfully looking for something that's not even there. The infrastructure doesn't really exist, and on top of that, we don't want it. So I think that our voices were heard loud and clear, and that's something that really, you've seen partnerships formed with members of the House on both sides of the aisle from other states, where we may be thinking about Long Island more than Florida, and the folks in Florida might be thinking of Florida more than they're thinking about New York. But by us talking to each other, working with each other, and advocacy groups talking to each other and working with each other, we all become stronger in getting the message out. Because simply the blasting, the search for these resources off our coast can cause a significant amount of environmental damage, and even worse, you don't even find anything.
And I remember that public hearing. 300 people showed up in the middle of a nor'easter. You remember, it was quite the day. All right, Congressman, our last question, but not the least important. It's a question on clean water, something near and dear to most people's hearts. As climate change worsens, unfortunately, Long Island will feel more of the impact, such as drought, more frequent droughts, and also such as saltwater intrusion into our sole source aquifer. Clean drinking water is one of the most important public health challenges that face us today. And in this district, there are a number of clean water challenges, from toxic chemicals in our aquifer, having to change and replace lead pipe, and also remediation of existing contaminants. Can you tell us specifically what you would do to protect the source of our drinking water, but also to clean up the contamination that unfortunately is already there?
This question does take a lot of time and energy on the part of my team in my office, because we have had challenges here that go back decades, and we will always be asking ourselves, what more can we do to protect water quality here in a district like ours? Whether it's Gabreski and the water quality challenges that they had as we were coming into office, and the old Grumman site and the Navy doing their testing, as well as the area around Brookhaven National Lab. All throughout the 1st Congressional District, you have areas where individual hamlets, individual communities either want to know the results of the testing that is going on, or they want to get added. They want their water quality to be tested as well. I'm a member of the PFAS task force. I also co-sponsor a legislation, the PFAS Action Act, where it's important to not only be regulating the PFAS, but also the federal government needs to assist local communities in the remediation of it. This starts from the smallest scale of, if you see an issue, making sure that you're providing bottled water, to the larger challenge, which is the total size of the cost of the cleanup. Now, it turns out that for us here in the 1st Congressional District, the total cost is manageable. The problem is that all throughout the entire country are these massive military installations, and the Department of Defense is looking at the cost. This isn't something that the federal government has decided, okay, we're just going to snap our fingers, we're going to pass one bill, and then all of a sudden everything's going to be cleaned up from all across the entire country. But you have to make progress each year. That's very important. It's also would be helpful for the EPA to set a level maximum amount of contaminants in our local water supply. These are all issues that I've had an opportunity to fight with many of you together as we're in the trenches, calling on different levels of government to take certain action. This is one of those areas where I believe it was around the beginning of 2019 where there was a call made here on Long Island. It was certainly a call that was renewed to the EPA to be setting this new standard. There was a new report that had come out around that time comparing Long Island's water supply with the rest of the state. I would also say the septic system that the county, the grant program that was initiated, the IRS, because of the way it was set up, determined it to be taxable income. I co-sponsor legislation with Congressman Swazi that would correct that. That's important. Also, investing in our sewer infrastructure is key. I live on the Mastic Peninsula, the Shirley Mastic Beach community, the Forge River project. Forge River, which is one of the most contaminated, you could say the most contaminated river in the state. I guess depends who you ask on what day, but many studies have been done on that front. And I think one of the ways to improve our water supply is investing in our septic systems, in sewer infrastructure that when you look at an area like the Mastic Peninsula as a perfect example between the Forge River and the Carmens River, that investment, implementing the Forge River project to completion is something that absolutely must happen. And it's not just because I live there in that community, it's something that when you see the investment into the hundreds of millions of dollars that's there right now to complete it, a vote of the local community saying, yes, we want it. Now's the time to get over the finish line and get that project done. So there's really a lot that goes into the answer, but PFAS, the septic system, the grant program from the county, as well as the federal investment that has been made and pursuing additional funds for more projects in the future, that's all important.
So, Congressman, would you like to just take the last 2 minutes to say some closing remarks for our viewers?
In the 1st Congressional District, which is this amazing district on the east end of Long Island, as I said earlier, completely surrounded by water, we all want to see our environment protected. We want our coastlines to be secure. This is our home. When someone is saying from some other part of the country that we chose to live this close to the water and that we all should just move inland and get away from here. No, we want to stay here and fight for our home. And whether it's policy on flood mitigation to be able to afford your premiums, or it's Army Corps of Engineer projects to come in for coastal resiliency, or it's a dredging project, or it's repairing a dune, whatever it is that local governmental official or community group is asking for, we want to see that return on our investment. Going into the COVID-19 pandemic, the Army Corps of Engineers in the entire New York district, which includes several counties of New Jersey, we got to the point where 2/3 of the money that they had on hand was just for 1st Congressional District of New York projects. And it's really a result of everybody working together, fully funding the National Estuary Program, continuing to increase funding for the Long Island Sound Program, fully funding Sea Grant, protecting Plum Island. Right now, we're fortunately at a point the Senate finally passed legislation for this past fiscal year. We got into law to stop the sale. Now for FY 2021, let's stop the sale of Plum Island. We got $1.5 million for the lighthouse there, which is great. It's just a product of everybody working well together to protect our air, to protect our water. And there are opportunities for us to debate on policy. I would say, and right now there's an election coming up, the most important thing I could say for the environment is that when the election's over, that we all, every single person who's tuning in right now, once you're past an election, you all just work together to try to find common ground however possible to move our local environment forward, our national environment, our economy, our country. I've been ranked by the Georgetown University and the Lugar Center as the 12th most bipartisan member of the House of Representatives because it's important if you want to actually get something done on the environment, if you want to get legislation over the finish line and appropriation over the finish line, if you have the attitude that you're going to go act on it alone and you're not going to work with anyone else who might disagree with you on other issues, well then you might never have any victory to be able to report home about. So I think it's fantastic that you're hosting this. I appreciate your leadership in doing this and for everyone for tuning in. It's important that everyone will vote. I'm sure if they are tuning in, they are going to vote. It's also important once the election is over, after everyone votes and the American people have their say, is that we work together on even more victories in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.